Welcome to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering those real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees, and this is my equally talented co host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. Dr. Ryman, you get to tell him why we're here. Why do we do what we do?
Well, we do what we do because there is so much misinformation on the internet about cannabis. And you can Google a question and get 100 different answers. And many times those answers directly contradict each other. It can take you hours to get to the bottom of the question you're actually answering. So what we like to do is present really easy to understand, actionable insights that are backed by science so you can get the information you need and get on with your life. So think of us as your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters here to give you the lowdown on cannabis.
That's right. And so, if you're an herb enthusiast or just a botanical detective, get ready because today we are diving deep into the green jungle to decipher a timeless mystery, and that is what's the difference between hemp and cannabis? So, get ready for a botanical battle royale as we untangle the roots of this age old confusion and shed light on the verdant nuances of our favorite plants. Dr. Ryman, I have to ask, what is the difference between hemp and cannabis? Like, is this the same thing we're talking about here? I mean,
So
I
the
know the
difference,
answer, but
yeah, well, you know the answer. So the difference between cannabis and hemp is nothing. End of episode. No, just kidding. So truthfully, we're talking about the same plant here. The biggest difference is the legal definition, and that dictates how these plants are regulated. So hemp is defined as having less than 3% or 0.3%, excuse me, THC, which is our intoxicating cannabinoid that is in the cannabis plant. And then cannabis is defined as a plant that has more than 0.3% THC. Now, because of those differences in regulation, there's a difference in their legality. So the hemp plant is federally legal, all 50 states. Cannabis, as we know, is not federally legal and is only available for either medical use or adult use in a handful of states.
okay, so I live in North Carolina where cannabis isn't legal. I see a lot of hemp derived products. That's pretty much all we have access to. And so some of those products, they have Delta 8 THC. But what gives with those products? Like they're hemp, right?
Yeah, so those products are derived from the hemp plant. So hemp, totally legal in North Carolina, also legal to ship hemp around the country. So you don't even have to grow it in North Carolina. You could import hemp from Oregon or from Washington. But because the natural cannabis plant, a plant with more than 0.3% THC, is illegal in states like North Carolina, folks have figured out how to take the CBD from hemp, which is federally legal, and transform it into a chemical similar to the intoxicating chemical THC that we find in the cannabis plant. However, there's no regulations around this. So the products that you see in the gas station in North Carolina, there is no testing. There is no regulatory body that makes sure that those are safe to consume. And in fact, a Massachusetts cannabis lab got about 500 samples of hemp-derived products last year and tested them and found contamination in 100% of the samples. So that's not to say they were necessarily dangerous, but none of them are regulated or tested. And we have a whole episode just on Delta 8 if you all want to learn more about that.
Yes, highly recommend. All right, well, so I know hemp used to be used for paper and rope and non consumed purposes. So what happened there?
Well, that's absolutely true. Hemp is a very valuable plant, and it's been a big part of our history in the US. In fact, the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper. During wars, it was encouraged that people and farmers grow hemp because they used it for rope and other purposes. But during the move to make cannabis illegal in the 1930s, there was this concern that because they're the same plant and look the same, especially if you're a plane from the government flying overhead trying to figure out if somebody's growing cannabis, that they should outlaw hemp as well, because it would be too easy for people to say, oh, I'm just growing hemp, but then interspersed between their hemp plants was going to be cannabis. Now, an interesting aside to this story is that there are some folks that think that this was just an excuse to get rid of hemp, because around the same time, James Randolph Hearst invented, or he didn't invent, but he started to market synthetic nylon fiber. And they really wanted this fiber to replace hemp, but there was really no reason for it to, because hemp was easier to grow. It was much less toxic. It was better for the environment. It had a wide variety of purposes. So there's definitely a group of people out there that believe that perhaps cannabis prohibition entirely was really because hemp was threatening this new market for synthetic fibers. And if this is something that piques your interest, because it's really fascinating, Jack Herrera wrote a book on this called The Emperor Wears No Clothes that really goes after and documents this move to make hemp illegal in the 1930s. So after that, hemp became illegal, just like cannabis was illegal. But in 2018, the federal farm bill made hemp and the CBD in hemp legal again.
Okay, so besides fiber and paper, what else can hemp make?
Well, hemp has so many amazing uses. And because it was prohibited for so long, we're really just getting back into the swing of what industrial hemp can do. So it makes an alternative to concrete called hempcrete that is fire resistant and also does a better job of keeping in heat and keeping out cold. It can make fuel for cars. And the hemp seed and hemp seed oil is one of the most wholly nutritious products on the market that you can possibly have. It's got protein, it's got antioxidants, it's got great oils in it, it's got good fats. So it's extremely nutritious. And in fact, when they were moving to make hemp illegal, one of the industries that was the biggest opponent of making hemp illegal was the bird seed industry. So hemp seed was a major ingredient in bird seed. It was very nutritious for the birds. And so the bird seed companies were not too happy about losing that ingredient.
Well, also, I guess if you have those, if you're still getting your cannabis with seeds in it, you can just throw those seeds out to the birds.
Yeah.
Well, do you think hemp and cannabis will ever be on equal ground?
Well, at the cultivation level, they really should be. When you think about beer, for example, we have alcoholic and non-alcoholic beer. They both come from hops. And hops is not alcoholic, right? It's just a plant that is made into alcohol. But you don't have fields of non-alcoholic hops and fields of alcohol hops. You just have hops. And then where those plants start to deviate is at the point of retail. So if you're buying a hops product that has alcohol in it, you have to be 21. If you're buying a hops product that doesn't have alcohol in it, I think you still have to be 21. But there's differences in how we tax those two products, right? Because one has alcohol and one doesn't. So from my perspective, if you are a cultivator of cannabis or hemp, you're a cultivator of that plant and you should be regulated the same. So in terms of how big the field can be, what kind of taxes you have to pay, that should be the same no matter what the THC level happens to be in that plant. And where the two should really deviate is in access by the public. If we decide that a cannabis product that has a certain amount of THC in it should only be accessed by adults, should only be sold in certain places, has certain taxes attached to it, perhaps that's different than a product made from a plant where it has no THC in it. But really at the cultivation level, it's all farming. Now, one thing to note is that cannabis farmers who are growing raw plant to be consumed through smoking or inhalation, other means, or made into manufactured products, they don't want hemp anywhere near their cannabis plants because hemp can pollinate, and the pollen from hemp can go really, really far. So one of the things we've seen up here in the Emerald Triangle, where we have a lot of cannabis cultivation going on, is really not a very warm reception to the idea of hemp farming because concern that that hemp is going to end up pollinating the cannabis. So I think it might be difficult for somebody to grow both cannabis for the raw plant and hemp on the same property because of those concerns about cross-contamination, unless the plants are indoors or you have some kind of barrier between the hemp and the cannabis plants.
And then one last question from me, because I'm thinking the THC percentages aren't the same in the plant. And you might have touched on that in the very beginning, but can you elaborate just a little bit more? Hemp that's grown for the 0.3%, 0.3%, and then cannabis is grown for the higher percent THC.
So right now there's kind of a feast or famine situation, if you will. Because if you want to be able to sell your plants as hemp, which means you can ship them across state lines, you can import them and export them outside of the country, it kind of has a whole different regulatory structure than cannabis, then you need to keep that THC percentage below 0.3%. On the cannabis side, people are breeding cannabis for very high levels of THC. They want their flower to have 20% and upwards of THC. And so there's this huge glut in the middle of plants that are lower in THC, but not low enough to be considered hemp. And I think from an industry perspective, that's a huge market that nobody's tapping into. There are folks out there that would rather have a plant that has 5% CBD and 5% THC, or something that's lower on the THC side, but isn't quite hemp, maybe a few percentage of THC, which would make it cannabis. And nobody's growing product for these people. They're either keeping it below the 0.3% threshold, or they're trying to reach above the 20% threshold. So I think another reason to kind of get rid of this false dichotomy between cannabis and hemp is that you would see people growing more products that are in the middle. The cannabis farmers feel that lower THC products have no value in the cannabis market. The hemp farmers can't grow anything above 0.3% and stay in the hemp market. And so it really makes it, from a consumer perspective, hard to find products that are somewhere in the middle. So let's say they were to get away or get rid of the 0.3% threshold for hemp and say, look, it's just the cannabis plant. If it tests this or below, it goes through this regulatory channel. If it tests this or above, it goes through this regulatory channel, and give people an opportunity to create products that are more in the middle.
Yeah. And thank you for breaking that down, because I think this is one of the most popular questions, because people don't know what they're getting unless they're just buying cannabis from a dispensary, right? You're not going to find a lot of hemp flower, for example, or hemp products for that matter. So that's why we're here. That's why we do what we do, because you could spend hours trying to find a real answer. And Dr. Ryman, you just gave them the truth. So thank you. All right. Well, we must bid adieu to this enlightening journey. And remember, your thoughts are the herbal elixir that fuels our curiosity. Drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants.com. Let your green musings bloom. We love hearing from our audience. And for an extra dose of plant-powered wisdom, don't forget to leaf through our vibrant YouTube collection. You heard us mention a Delta 8 episode in this one. Be sure to check that out. And while you're there, hit subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell to stay in the loop, because you don't want to miss what we got coming down the pipeline. Until our next botanical rendezvous, stay lifted, stay green, and keep those questions blooming.